Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. I know you're swamped with lots of pulls and commitment on your schedule, and I appreciate you doing this. I think I shared with you. I had a mutual friend, Bruce Eskowitz, who has been working with Lionel Richie as his agent and support, who also was a executive producer of the making the greatest night in pop around, the making of We Are the World. So you follow in his line as the second in the series of us doing these firesides. I don't know if you want to break into song anytime soon. You're more than welcome to, but I really, really appreciate you doing this.
Well, always happy to be with old friends. Bruce, I mentioned to you, I was just at a fun session with, among others, Senator Corner, and he had to rush off. And I thought he was rushing off for a vote, but he's actually rushing off to Dallas for a Lionel Richie concert in a fairly intimate venue, I believe.
Yes. So and of course, Lionel Richie, was the star performer for the crowning of King Charles, as you may be aware. So, all things are equal. Mark, a lot of people know you. We got to know each other back in Austin when you were editor of the Daily Texan. You had an illustrious career, coming out of the University of Texas. But make a connection, one or two, just on some of the path to where you are. How did you go remind me how you went from the Daily Texan to becoming so involved in political campaigns? What was that?
Well, just to precede it even a little bit, I ended up in Texas. I was a songwriter, but not a very good one. I ran away from home in high school and went to Nashville, lived on Chris Christopherson's couch for a few years, and then I came out to Texas in 1975 to play at the Kerrville Folk Festival.
Right.
And then I moved to Austin because I loved what it was popping in Austin at the time. And but after I banged around for a couple of years and realized how good everyone else was, I exercised some judgment one of the few times in my life, because I realized on the track that I was on, I was likely to be the second act at the Pflugerville Holiday Inn when I was 50. So I realized I decided to get a little higher education, went to UT. I always loved to write. I mean, that's why I liked, so I was in the songwriting business. And so I pretty quickly drifted to the Daily Texan, started covering everything, including and especially politics, which I always loved, wrote a lot about it. And then a local state senator who I covered a lot decided to run for the U.S. Senate in 1984. That's Lloyd Doggett, who is still a member of Congress.
Right.
And did my very first campaign with James Carville and Paul Begala and some of our other old pals. And then, we lost we won an upset primary. And I remember that because Carville was both a madman and a genius. And after we won the primary, a decision was made to house James in a separate building because he was scaring the intern so badly. And then we lost the general election, and then I thought that was the end of that, and I'd have to go do something else, and I discovered you could fail upwards in politics, and I went to work for Mark White, and then I went to Louisiana and did a race over there, and then I went to New York and worked for kind of one of the great media personalities and characters in the business out of New York, a guy named David Sawyer, and then I came back to Austin to set up my own shop and work for Ann Richards.
Right.
And then in a very, singular sort of pathway, I'm a demographic cell of one that has worked both for Ann Richards and George W. Bush.
Right.
Because he came to town with his message of compassionate conservatism, and I liked that a lot, and we became friends. And then he asked me to work on his reelected, which I did. And then I went on to do both his presidential elections.
Right. So it's you still play an instrument, correct?
I don't really. I mean, I really kind of wore out those shoes, and when I shifted gears to go to school, I knew I couldn't be screwing around on the side, so I pretty much locked up my gear in the closet. But I did buy an accordion a couple of years ago. So.
I have so many ways to go on that, but
Yeah, well, it's just so Pops can play Volare out on the porch for the grandkids.
That's one image. The other is that if things really don't work out, you got the accordion, you got a little hat, and
I got a side hustle.
Help a man out, right?
Yeah.
All right. So one of the big questions that a lot of people are probably either asking you or want to know, all right? Tell us about the status of the circus, which has been a phenomenal success. But what's the status now of the remainder of 2024 coverage for going through, the presidential? And will it continue in some form or format in some way?
Thanks for asking. So it's one of those just crazy kind of Hollywood stories, because I pitched the show for 10 years, actually 12 years before it got on.
Wow. Okay.
And it was like, this is a classic Hollywood where I had 99 meetings and the 100th one said yes. Yeah. And it's a long, long story that I won't bore you with, except to say that people liked the idea. They just didn't think we could pull it off because it's kind of a magic trick. And in reality, they were right. We needed technology to catch up. We couldn't have done it when I first pitched it. We just because we have to turn it so fast, because we make a documentary in a week, which normally takes 6 months. And anyway, we were at Netflix for a while, and then we were at HBO, and then finally Showtime stepped up, and for 100 different reasons turned out to be the best and perfect partner for us. But the whole show was designed. I had worked in campaigns most of my life, and I found them to be fascinating, kind of petri dishes of humanity and characters, and it was entertaining and just an orbit of great personalities and stories, and 99% of which the public never sees. And I thought it'd be fascinating to pull back the curtain if you could get the access and show what really goes on behind the scenes. And that was the idea, but it had to be real time. And that's what was made it sort of impossible, but also really interesting when we were able to pull it off. Anyway, when we got the okay to do it, it was only intended to be one season. It was supposed to be a show about campaign. So maybe come back 4 years later, but it was just supposed to be about the campaign. And then when, after we finished the campaign and it got 3 weeks into the Trump administration, the folks at Showtime said, "Hey, the circus hadn't stopped. Keep going." Right. And I was at first skeptical, because I said, it's Washington, it's static. How interesting could it be? Well, little did I know. Yeah. And then we just kind of, we caught lightning in a bottle in terms of the timing and all the, madness that happened over the course of the next 8 years. And so we went 8 seasons and 130 episodes up until last fall. And then this is kind of just, again, it's Hollywood, which makes no sense, and is a train wreck in a graveyard right now, and nothing makes sense, just to the degree that this was the highest watched, longest running unscripted show in the history of Showtime. Right. But Showtime got taken over by Paramount. Paramount is trying to sell the company. So all they're trying to do is cut the budget. So everybody at Showtime that we worked for who had anything to do with the show was fired. Right. So there was nobody left. Nobody at Paramount had any investment in the Showtime, and their job was just to come up with cost savings and cut budgets. So they cut the budget. And so, I was honestly out of gas myself, and I had already redone my contract to kind of back off. But it is nutty that after this 8-year great time capsule that we would not be covering this last and maybe most interesting chapter of this story. Right. But the agents and the managers are trying to take it around, and there could be somebody else that picks it up. But I'm also doing likely doing a documentary film on the election as well, kind of analyzing Gen Z. So I've got an oar in the water still.
All right. So look, I'm going to come back to that in a second. Let's go back to the format and the formation. All right. Who'd you find first? John? Who came on the team first?
Good question. So in order to do this show, I mean, first of all, I just preface this by saying my initial notion was that there would be a cast of very diverse, like 30 or something or 40 something journalists or campaign types. I had never intended to be in it myself. But then the key to making the show work, especially at the very beginning. Now imagine you're going to people like, well, Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, all the people that ran for president. You're saying, we want you to give extraordinary access to this show called The Circus. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so I needed the most credible journalist in the business. Mark Halpern had just come off Game Change,
Right.
The book and the movie, and won a bunch of awards for it, and very, very well known in the business as, a really like this, the smartest guy in the business, and knew everybody, had a Rolodex this big. And
Yep.
and so when I mentioned the show to him, and he like immediately was like, I want to do this, because he saw it as kind of the next iteration of how to cover campaigns. And I needed his kind of credibility and access, because he could call anybody and he could get in the door. But when he said, I want to be part of it, he said, oh, by the way, I'm a package deal. John Heilemann and I are a package deal, because I did this book with him. They were doing a TV show at the time too, called for Bloomberg, called, I forget what it's called, but and which they did during the first year of our show, which was amazing. I don't know how they did that, but anyway. So it was not by design that it would be the three of us, or not, and it was not the original intention, but it worked out great. And Mark and John they were two of the best in the biz. And again, for lots and lots of reasons, the show never could have happened without either one of them. Mark later got in some Me Too trouble, and we brought in other people, but we'd always intended on diversifying the cast and bringing in other people. People thought we did it just because of Mark, but we had been considering that for a long time anyway.
All right. So you got this weekly show that takes a week in the life of politics, and not just in Washington, D.C., literally primaries, events that you kind of anticipated, some events that you don't. How the hell do you script? How do you literally create the storyboard?
Yeah. Well, that's another really good question, Richard. This is, I learned a quick lesson from Hollywood, which was, I had initially said, well, just lots of stuff's going on. We'll just, whatever's going on, we'll just throw it up there. And they were like, nah, that's not how it works. So if you go back and watch any episodes of The Circus, you'll notice that in every episode, there is a theme to it.
Right.
And with, we were pretty successful at, for the most part, making the shows all about that theme of that week. And so, we would, between Mark and John and I and the other sort of leadership of the show, the producers and others, we'd try and look ahead and say, well, this is what's going to be important. This is what's happening. By the way, just as another footnote, when they first gave us the show, they gave us 26 episodes, which is a lot of TV. That's like 2 seasons of a normal show in a year. But my first reaction was, oh my God, there's going to be weeks where we're not going to have enough material. That never happened. In 130 episodes, every single week is what were we going to cut. So that was, we always just had, the problem was just so much happened during this era. And the challenge was that we'd start off with the theme of the week, and by Thursday or Friday, something monumental would happen to just kind of blow up the show. And often we're kind of completely redoing the show on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
So that's kind of one of my things that you and I talked a little bit about, is you got this theme, and then at the same time you have to be dynamic to the nuances or something that happened, right? So how you're sitting in Denver, where you're going to go to do your part. You're either going to go to DC and trailing somebody around in the halls of Congress, or you're going to be on the West Coast covering a rally. I mean,
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I never actually, when we were doing the show, I never was in Denver. I'd take off for 3 months at a time and be
okay,
literally on the road for 3 months. And,
got it.
and I would not know most of the time until the day before, if I was lucky, where I was going the next day, because we were so nimble. It's like, this is breaking, McKinnon, get to Montana. This is breaking,
Right.
get to New York City. And I
Okay.
would just have to jump on a plane, jump on a train, jump on an automobile, do whatever. But that was, again, we had the best in the business from in terms of editors and producers and camera people. And we just turned on a dime. And like I said, often on a Thursday or Friday, we'd have to react to events and completely remake a show. And we'd be up till Sunday morning at 7 a.m. and sending it out.
That's like running a political campaign, Mark, every week.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, right?
It was exactly like that. That's exactly what it was like. And then have to start over every Monday morning.
All right. Were you surprised at the response in the market for it?
Well, yeah.
Did this feed the junkies out there? But it went even beyond the junkies of political.
Well, that's what I was most surprised by and was really rewarding, was that the junkies loved it, but even more so, the people who really loved it or became an audience that I hadn't expected were very casual people who, are not junkies at all, but like they want to go to work on Monday morning or go to school and kind of just know what's going on, and they could tune into our show Sunday night. And it was fun and fast and furious, and not just some boring, people sitting on a, in a studio. We were out, around the country drinking and having fun. And so it was a way for casual viewers to get a quick, fun update and go to work or school and kind of know what's going on. And that's where we really built the audience. And that's why I think really became successful.
All right. So who was the most angry versus who was the most supportive of the stories? When you got out there and you got feedback, who was the most angry? Who was the most supportive?
You mean in terms of the people we were talking to, or?
Well, let's talk about that first. The principals, the folks that you were covering, who was the most angry, who was the most supportive, but then from an audience perspective, from people who when you went out and either spoke with, when you were at South by or Texas Tribune or something, I'm curious about who loved it, who hated it, and why.
Well,
I don't know if I'm making sense of the nuance there, but
yeah, first of all, it was a very obviously tumultuous time, a hugely partisan time. We tried our very best to be balanced in the coverage and to be fair anyway. But at a certain point, we had our own opinions too, and we kind of leaned a certain direction. And if you know me, I'm kind of a radical centrist, Bush compassionate Republican, but I'm not a MAGA guy. And and I would express. And in fact, at one point, I thought that we should have a more MAGA host on the show, and that's kind of a whole nother story. But I always went out of my way to try and reflect fairly what was going on in MAGA land. But over time, listen, we were part of the, we're part of the media, and and they were only doing Fox, and so we became kind of, to a lot of that world, the enemy. But there's a funny Donald Trump story I'll tell you real quickly, which is that there's a guy named Dan Crenshaw, who you may know, who from Houston, a congressman, and I've known Dan for a long time, and I saw him in Washington, and I just said hello, and he said, hey, I just got back from Camp David, and I said, oh, that's interesting. I said that must have been fun. He said, oh yeah, we had a great time. He said, you'll never guess what we did for entertainment Saturday night after dinner. I said, no. He said, we watched election night of the circus. He said, Trump has it on on a loop and watches it over and over and over again. I mean, for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously because he liked the drama of what happened that night and in that episode, but he loved the way we made him look, because we have these big, incredibly expensive cameras that make everybody look good. And so Trump liked it. But, listen, I think about, I have sort of PTSD over time, because it got really hard to cover a lot of stuff out there because people were so angry and so partisan. And I remember being down on the border. This is just the kind of example, down on the border after January 6th. And this is during COVID, and people like spitting on me, getting in my face without masks during COVID, screaming about January 6th and how Trump was still the rightful president, and, that we were traitors, and just that kind of stuff. So that made it very tough. And, I called it being in the human microwave, because it was at times very difficult work like that.
All right. One last thing about the circus, and then we'll move on to some of the other topics we kicked around. Did you gain weight? What's your favorite food? And was this really a show that was really an excuse to get into some great restaurants? So this is just you and me, Mark. There's nobody else listening. Yeah. Did you gain weight?
Well, yes. I don't think it was any secret that this was really a booze and food show disguised as a political show. I mean, but it is funny, Richard, because the first episode of the show, we just, we said, well, listen, we got to have to kind of set up the week and talk about what's going to happen. And the one thing we didn't want to do was be in a studio in suits and be something really static. So we said, well, let's just go to a really cool restaurant that we love and do it there. And we did it. And people went bananas over that. And so it became a staple of the show. And we had like there's a food porn audience out there that is massive. And, if you want to, I came to learn how much food and booze, brings people together.
Right.
People love food and booze. And so people would watch our show just to see where we ate and what we drank.
Well, all right. So again, let me play off of that. First off, sitting around a table, sitting around a kitchen, you kind of put people at ease, right? Yeah. That's one part of it. Okay. Second of all, who made the decision per episode, which restaurant, which type of food?
Well, except when we were in places like Texas, where I'd find a taco place to go. It was always Heilemann or Alex Wagner, because for two reasons. I mean, John, of course, knew every restaurant owner in New York,
right?
And he knows all the celebrity chefs. He knows all the great chefs in the country. Alex Wagner's husband was Obama's chef at the White House.
Right. So he kind of had
those two. They always had to connect.
All right. So one other item. Did I miss the book, the memo, the article, the catalog of all 134 episodes of the restaurants and the menu that y'all had? Has somebody brought all that together, packaged it? Did I miss it?
You did miss it. It's out there somewhere, and I don't remember where, but there are people out there who tracked it and then put it out there. So with a little sleuthing, you can find it.
Okay. All right. Now, Mark, go back to your days of going from music to journalism to communications. All right. You started in the 80s. You described putting together, took a decade, technology caught up. We have these things. We have lots of other, all right. If you looked at where news coverage is today, what are the 2 to 3 most significant changes that either surprise you or scare you about where things were when you started in the 80s, where you even started at the beginning of Netflix, and where all of this is right now from a news coverage and the changes that have occurred?
Yeah. Great question. Technology, the internet, social media has had a revolutionary impact on everything. and
Right.
we'll be studying that forever. But it changed the game in a big way. And the thing that concerns me most is the ease with which disinformation can now be peddled out there easily and with great volume. And so I mean, the thing that's happened over the last decade is that there's been a complete breakdown in our ability to get reliable information. There's I mean, we know from the 2016 campaign that there were Macedonian teenagers being paid to pump disinformation and Russian troll farms pumping in disinformation into Facebook on the 2016 election. We don't, we will never know what impact that had, but in an election that close, you can certainly say that it could have changed the outcome. And then this whole notion that there can be alternative facts, and that there's no shared notion anymore of what a fact is. So how do you have debates? How do you have constructive dialogue? How do you create public policy if people can't even agree on what the facts are? And so, and as a consequence of that, we have this complete breakdown in public trust of everything, including the Supreme Court, but especially the media.
Right.
And, this is exactly what, people like Vladimir Putin, that's their dream, to happen to America, which is, it's not that Vladimir Putin loves Donald Trump. He just loves chaos, and Trump's good at creating chaos. So
Right.
he just wants, he wants people, the authoritarians around the world want a United States in which we don't trust our government, our Supreme Court, or the media. And that's where we are right now. And
Instability. Instability.
Exactly. Instability and chaos. So that's my greatest concern. And, and then, news has just been devastated by the economics, and you look at the disappearance of, all the local media outlets that have happened. And, and there's some great experiments popping up, like the Texas Tribune,
Right.
all the great work that Evan's done there. But, but there are very few examples of that, and a lot more examples of, well, I mean, just look across the board of all the newspapers that have disappeared in Texas.
Wait, let me play off something you just said about facts. If you could, in some unique way, how can you get a fact to stick today, Mark? Is it the repetition of the what?
Well, I think we just have to kind of go through the kind of the rinse and wash cycle. And now we have, stack on top of that artificial intelligence.
Right.
That's the bad news, that we're awash in bad information, disinformation, and artificial information. The good news is that we know that. Unlike 2016, when nobody knew that there were Russian troll farms or Macedonian teenagers, now we know. So I think that while there's more of it out there than ever before, our consciousness has been raised so that, the people are aware it's out there. Hopefully they're more discerning about, if they see something, it's like see something, say something, see something, be wary,
right.
If you see or read something that sounds unbelievable, it probably is. And
right.
So I think that what that's done is it's created a flight to quality. In other words, while a lot of businesses are going out of operation, a lot of them are doing really well. The really good, reliable news organizations, the Atlantic, New York Times, you can kind of go down the line. There's not a lot of them, but there's a number of them that are hiring more reporters than ever, doing more investigative journalism than ever. So that, I think that people are increasingly questioning what they see, and increasingly there's a flight to quality, so that they're hopefully getting information that is reliable.
I'm going to come back to where the article that you sent to me just a bit ago from Vanity Fair, right?
Yeah.
Who would have thought? Wait, come on. Who would have thought 20 years ago? All right. I mean, Vanity Fair threw one of the great parties at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, right? I mean, it's so now, like you said, there's really certain platforms that are really stepping up more and more into the news and opinion world. If I'm saying that right, Mark. I mean,
Yeah.
Atlantic was a great magazine, but it's really become, a source. Is that what you're when you say,
Yeah.
flight to excellence? Is that what you're seeing? Is these brands that have survived, they've got resources, and they can actually start organizing news in a different way?
Yeah. And the Atlantic's a great example. They're more successful than they've ever been in their history. And I think they're actually turning a profit for the first time in their history. But they're hiring the best reporters in the country, and they're really investing. And like I said, there's a ton of operations going out of business, and the economic models are tough. But for those who are surviving, they're killing it, and they're doing really well. So
When you talk to the generation that was back when you and I were young, and I had hair and yours wasn't gray, when you talk to this kind of next generation of kids who want to do journalism or want to do what are they telling you?
wow, well, I mean, it's like I said, it's just such a different world. I mean, to them, news is like influencers.
Right.
That's
Right.
They get their news on. In fact, they get most of their news from TikTok and YouTube. And by the way, I'm likely doing a project focused on Gen Z, just because they're such a fascinating generation and so unconventional and so counter to what we think they are. I mean, we think, oh, they're young voters and citizens, and this is how that they must behave because they're X, and it turns out they're Y and Z, and they're really cynical, Richard. They're really cynical, and they feel like they've been left a really shitty deal, and that they've got these two 80-year-olds running for president who have no idea what their lives are like, and have left them, deeply in debt, and just not a very. They're not optimists. I'm a prisoner of hope, but they're not. They're
Right.
in fact, I went to a Gaza protest at a campus, and there were a bunch of very passionate Gen Z voters out there, and I talked to them all, and they were very passionate about that issue and completely divided on it. I talked to people on both sides of it, and they obviously passionately disagreed on that issue, but what they did agree on was when I asked them, they said, screw Biden, screw Trump. And I was like, well, what are you going to do? And they said, well, we're either not going to vote or we're going to vote for RFK or Cornel West or one of the third party alternatives. So,
Right.
They're unhappy. And so I think standard journalism is probably not the route that many of them are going.
Do you, I mean, you and I were mentored by, not always the same people, but we were mentored of a generation. And I remember being told, and some of these are mutual friends of ours, that you and I are supposed to leave this better for the next generation than we received it. Right? It's every generation success, is supposed to be better, enhanced, improved. I think you just confirmed for me one of my biggest concerns, Mark, and that is that this next generation is probably going to feel like we did not leave them better off, right? And how they address it politically, economically is still up for grabs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of data and information coming out right now about this generation and how screwed up they are, because of COVID, because of social media, because of, just the mess that we've left them. And you're right. I mean, the one thing we always felt good about growing up is there just was this notion that we had huge opportunity, and the opportunity was of the kind that was highly likely that we would do better than our parents did. And I just don't think, I think most people, Gen Z, feel like it's more than likely that they won't do as well as their parents have done.
Right.
So, and that just has enormous consequences, and for not just politics, but our culture and the future of the country.
All right. Before we move off of Gen Z, what's your one thing that you're hanging hope on for them?
Well, my hope is that despite all that, they're very discerning, they're very smart, they're very active, and that at the end of the day, they'll kind of see what sort of the existential questions are before them. That they don't have great choices, but they'll move in a way that I think is I'm a prisoner of hope, but I think they'll move in big numbers, and they'll move in a responsible way because they know that we're not going to do it for them. They got to do it for themselves.
I think, do you sense technology, innovation, worldly, meaning that somewhat colorblind, open to the world? I mean, you see those being factors in some of that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for all the ills of technology, I also believe that technology has great power and potential to save our asses. And,
Right. Right.
I don't think we can count on that, but I think there's, if you look at history and, what little I know about artificial intelligence, I mean, there's a lot of sort of, doom scrolling about AI, but its potential is really remarkable too. And it's happening. What's happening in technology is, I mean, is beyond our comprehension about what it can do and how fast it's moving. So
Right.
I think 5 years from now, we'll look back and we'll be stunned by what happened that we didn't anticipate.
Well, and we're seeing that. Look, we're seeing that in drug discovery. We're seeing that in a number of things. All right, I'm gonna come back to some of this, but and again, I'm gonna be mindful of time. I want to go back to you being on the bus with candidates, being in places where you're one-on-one. All right. I'm assuming, like I know of you, that you did a little bit of research before you got on the bus with a candidate. You got some, all right. But at the same time, again, being dynamic when you're with these folks where it's really marked just you and them. There may be some staff and a handler somewhere, but you've got a little bit more of a private insight to them in that kind of setting. What was the most surprising scenario when you were on the bus? Before you talk about a specific event or circumstance, but what was the most surprising thing that you picked up when you're in that kind of close setting with them?
Well, the format invites authenticity and honesty, and that was the intent, was to provide an environment in which people didn't feel like they were having to like work off their talking points and to reveal some of their humanity. And so, I mean, just as an example, Bernie Sanders was a guy early on who really kind of got what we were doing, and we got in his hip pocket and got in his hotel room on election night and really behind the scenes, and he became a real character in our show, and people loved him because he was so accessible. And again, there's just a huge power in authenticity, even if you don't agree with somebody, if they're very real. But
Right.
but also, I just say that the intent of the show was never to be a gotcha,
Right.
not
It
to be
wasn't
like
confrontational. It wasn't
on the other
confrontational.
hand, there were times when, like, there's an amazing interview I did with Dan Patrick that you can find on YouTube. That was really kind of dramatic because it was right. It was it was that COVID election. I guess it was 2020, and or would that have been 22? Whenever the COVID election was.
20, yeah, 2022.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So yeah, yeah, and so I mean, I knew Patrick not well, but I knew him from my Texas days, and and he knew how I roll, and I'm a pretty easygoing guy,
Right.
and so I mean, first of all, he agreed to the interview, and again, lots of Republicans, but especially Republicans like Dan Patrick, don't do a lot of media these days. Ask the Texas, the Tribune how hard it is to get to Abbott or Patrick anymore. I mean, they just don't
Right.
talk to them anymore.
Yep.
Other than Fox, I mean, just Republicans are OAN, but they just don't talk to broader media. So, but I had some history, and and like I said, I'm not a gotcha guy, and but it was right in the middle of COVID, and it was when all the election stuff was happening. So I came down and did an interview with him that was it was kind of jaw dropping, just in the sense of, yeah, I mean, I was surprised at just how, I mean, I was asking kind of fundamental questions about election integrity and what have you, and he seemed remarkably unprepared, at least from a factual basis, to back up the sort of claims he was making. And so I just kind of questioned it, and I think in a way that I guess he didn't expect. I don't
Right.
think he expected the pushback. But I mean, I did it in a completely friendly way, and I was just trying to get answers to some pretty basic questions. But it was those kind of things where I'd find myself in an environment where, an authentic, not like a 60 minutes kind of format, but people would be, remarkably sort of unguarded, and then we get some pretty special moments.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty revealing, right? They become. I mean, they kind because let me follow down that line. What That's one of them. Was there others where in that kind of one-on-one setting, something came out, revealed itself to you that was almost an indicator of something that was going to become larger down the line?
Well, I mean, that's the best example I can think of, because that was just like, a drop in the bucket of what, we a couple of months later blew up into, huge issues. And, but, gosh, I mean, the thing about going back to the circus is there's so much foreshadowing that goes on.
Right. That's where I'm trying to think of the right word. Yeah.
Including and especially Trump. I mean, just, you have to remember in 2015, Trump was one of 18 candidates, and nobody thought he was going to be elected, including and especially him.
Right.
I mean, we know from our own reporting that he thought that Chris Christie was going to win the nomination. He was going to endorse him, but he just thought it was a good way to get a bunch of attention.
Right.
So you can see the kind of foreshadowing all the things that happened, including Trump, including January 6th, and so all the elements of listen. I mean, just January 6th. I think if you watch the show, you'll see there are interviews that we do, months before January 6th, that it's like, oh, of course this is going to happen. After you kind of, you go back and look at it, like all the clues were there.
All right, wait a second. So I may have heard you wrong. Are you telling me that the circus is like The Simpsons, that if you go back and look at The Simpsons, it gave you an indicator of what was going to happen? Is that?
Yeah, we weren't quite up to Simpson level of forecasting, but we were a close second. I'll tell you that. The Simpsons.
Right. Give me a couple of the funniest things that happened, quote unquote, on the bus that either we may not recall or that you now can talk about.
Well, again, it's meeting characters in unusual places, and trying to gain insight. And I mean, one of the better scenes that we did was with Marjorie Taylor Greene and with Jennifer Palmieri, who became a host. And Jennifer was, her claim to fame was Hillary Clinton. I mean, there was nobody closer to Hillary Clinton than Jennifer Palmieri. And we sent her into the wild in Georgia with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and they got along great. And because they're such opposites,
Right.
And you'd think, oh my God, this isn't going to work. And strangely, because in their own way, in their own worlds, they're popular, and they both had a curiosity about each other. And so we just had this great scene where we just kind of went into Margaret Taylor Greene's district to kind of say, what the hell's going on here that the rest of America, doesn't get. And I think we got great insights into her and her district. And you asked what's funny. There's this great scene of all of us in her district at some carnival in the middle of nowhere, where this guy is shot out of a cannon, and we have it all on film of the guy being shot out of the cannon. And the guy gets, this is like, again, in the middle of nowhere, and the guy who gets shot out of the canyon turned out to be this fascinating character who's in the Guinness Book of World Records as, the longest cannon shot human in recorded history. And, he goes like a quarter of a mile out of this cannon.
And you got that on camera.
We
So you provided the evidence to the Guinness Book of World. All right, give me one other really kind of funny scenario that may not have made the show, may have gotten cut, or is there something?
Well, so this is just an anecdote. So I'm just kind of a shallow media guy who does campaigns, and so I'm not a real reporter. I'm just a guy who's curious, and so I had a much different approach than like John Heilemann, who's like a very intrepid, aggressive reporter. And John was so aggressive that sometimes the interviews blew up. Like he did one with Jenna Ellis, who was Trump's lead lawyer on the election stuff, and they got into it for 5 minutes, and she just tears her microphone off and screams out of the room. But my favorite episode of all time for the circus, and again, the circus was I know now, I didn't really get it then because I didn't have any context for it, but ridiculously expensive to produce. And that's why it looks so good. But now that I'm in the graveyard of Hollywood and doing other projects, I showed up to a thing the other day, and there was like a guy there with one camera, and I was like, "Where's everybody else?" And they're like, "What do you mean everybody else?" This is it. But
he just picked up the camera at Best Buy that afternoon, right?
Yeah, not far from it. Not far from it. But we had so much trust from the network and so much resources. They underwrote us going to Russia, and my favorite episode is this episode we did from Russia. And it was like and again, we had crazy luck in our timing of when, again, you asked about themes and anticipation. We really timed stuff well so that we were right in the pocket of big stuff when it happened. And that week we were in Russia was the week there was the Skripal poisonings. They threw out a bunch of ambassadors out of the country.
Yep.
John Huntsman, who I know was the ambassador to Russia, was like literally like alone at home in the ambassador's residence in Russia. Like everybody was gone, like except for one lonely security guard and Huntsman. And then so it was real tense, and we were being followed by Russian agents, and it was intense and dramatic and interesting. And and we were also, oh God, I'm just remembering it now. I get chills thinking about it. Anyway, John did an interview with a woman who was like Putin's #1 KGB press comms person, and it was a battle royale of like two of the best in the biz, of John and this Russian Putin agent going at each other about, John was just pressing her on the troll farms and disinformation, and she was accusing him of being a U.S. agent. Anyway, it was classic television of people
just watching two crocodiles go at each other in the mud.
Yeah, and it was an episode I was really proud of. So if you're gonna go back and look at one episode, check out the Russian episode. It was the first one of, I don't know what year it was, but it was first.
All right. We're in the middle of a presidential. What's the one thing we should be looking for, and what's one thing you think could change the whole landscape?
Well, I think I mentioned James Carville earlier.
Yes.
Maybe that was before we started rolling, Richard. But anyway, James Carville, who I did my first campaign with in Texas in 1984, is a madman and a genius. And even though he's even older than I am, he's still really sharp. But he's old enough but he's smart enough to know he's too old to be running for president.
Right.
A little big there. But he said that I think the one and maybe only thing that's true about this election, which is the era of strategic certainty is over. In other words, all of the things in most elections that we sort of rely on historically, it's like to predict the outcome, just throw them out the window. Even though we have a rerun of two very predictable guys that we're not going to learn anything new about these two guys that we don't already know. And yet, within just a couple of news cycles, even in the last week or so, the dynamics have shifted overnight. We had the Arizona abortion decision, which suddenly flipped what once looked like a certain state for Trump to maybe a certain state for Biden. Then the next day, the inflation numbers crept back up after everybody thought it was going to be a soft landing now, and maybe rate cut and blah blah blah. Suddenly now it didn't look so good for Biden. So then it swung back. So it's a situation where we have two characters and a rerun that nobody really wants to watch, and yet the outcomes really, you could just flip a coin right now about the way it's going to turn out. And James concluded by saying, and I'll conclude by saying, I think we'll look back a year from now and go, God damn, I didn't see that one coming.
Right. So there's no October surprise. There's like a daily October surprise, a weekly October surprise. All right. I want to close this out because I appreciate your time, and I know it's been a long day for you. But I'm going to shift this completely. All right. Yes or no? You're competing in the Senior Olympics skiing. What's the story? Break it to us. I want a breaking news story right now. You have agreed to do the downhill Senior Olympics skiing. Yes, no?
Well, I coming from the reigning Houston pickleball champion.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. You bought that one. You bought that one.
The one thing that now that I've had back surgery to repair all the broken pieces from all the crazy mountain biking and extreme sports that I used to do, I've decided to take up activities that won't put me in the hospital, and I can't wait to join you in the pickleball Olympics, Richard, if I can work my way up there.
Yes.
But I'm all for less bodily injury. So pickleball and golf and poker are now kind of on my radar screen.
All right. You want to talk about the dog for a moment? Your
Gracie, come here.
Your faithful companion.
Gracie. See if I can get her. Come here, Grace. Come say hi on TV. Come on. Here she is. Here's Gracie.
Gracie. How old is Gracie now?
Little cameo.
How old is Gracie now?
Gracie is 11.
And loves the snow.
She's a skier. She's a mountain bike racer. She can go not anymore, but neither can I. She used to go 4 hours on a mountain biking with me. And she goes in the really deep snow backcountry skiing with me too.
Okay. And now she's going out to the creek out there and picking up some of the trout for you and bringing it in and cooking it too. Is that what's happening?
Fishing is the other one. You have very, very good research there. Yes.
Yes. Because you have picked up fly fishing, which I can tell you is not like Gulf of Texas, Gulf of Mexico fishing anymore. It's
no, I haven't. It's one of those things, Richard. It's like I'm not a natural fisherman, but I live at 10,000 feet by a national forest with a river running through it, one of the best fishing rivers in the world. So people would always come up there and expect to go fishing. And just over the years, I sort of did it out of obligation. Then finally, I did it enough to where I got just competent. And as soon as you get competent in fly fishing, man, you get hooked because there's no drug.
Well, it's like golf. I mean, it's fly fishing and golf are very, very similar. Okay, what's the book you're reading? What's the one big book you're reading right now that we ought to be looking at?
Oh man, that's a great question. I just finished a really good one called Martyr. So I recommend Martyr. let's see. I don't read. I read largely fiction, and because I get enough of the real stuff in my daily life. So I just finished the TV series Shogun, which I highly recommend.
Okay, that was going to be my second question. What are you binge watching? So Shogun,
Shogun, really good.
very well filmed, phenomenal visual.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's a great story anyway. And
Manhunt.
Yeah.
Manhunt. Have you watched Manhunt?
No, I don't even know what that is.
This is the movie that essentially is about the manhunt for John Wilkes Booth.
Oh,
Phenomenal.
all right.
You know, um, Mark, it's been great. Thank you for taking time doing this.
Great being with you, old friend, and thank you for doing this. Appreciate what you do, and keep the faith. Be a fellow prisoner of hope. Never give up. Carry on regardless.
That's all we can do. All we can do. Thank you, my friend. Be well.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, guys.